This book tells the story of the Vietnam War. It was a very long and hard war. It happened in the country of Vietnam in Southeast Asia. This war changed Vietnam and also the United States in important ways. Understanding this war helps us understand the world today. For many years before the war, Vietnam was not a free country. Other countries controlled it. First, a powerful country called China controlled Vietnam for a very long time in the past. Later, in the 1800s, France came to Vietnam. France took control and made Vietnam part of its empire, along with nearby countries like Cambodia and Laos. This time under France was called French Indochina. Many Vietnamese people did not want to be ruled by France. They wanted their own country. These people were called nationalists. They became stronger over time. During the Second World War, another country, Japan, took control of Vietnam for a while. When that war ended in 1945, Japan left. A Vietnamese leader named Ho Chi Minh said that Vietnam was now a free and independent country. Ho Chi Minh was a communist leader who fought for Vietnam's freedom. But France did not agree. France wanted to control Vietnam again. This started a war between Vietnam and France. This war is called the First Indochina War. It lasted from 1946 to 1954. The Vietnamese fighters, led by Ho Chi Minh and General Vo Nguyen Giap, fought against the French army. The fighting was difficult for both sides. In 1954, the Vietnamese army won a very important battle called Dien Bien Phu. This was a big defeat for France. After this, countries met in a city called Geneva to talk about the future of Vietnam. They made an agreement called the Geneva Accords. This agreement said that France would leave Vietnam, but it also said that Vietnam would be separated into two parts for a short time. There would be North Vietnam and South Vietnam. The line between them was at a place called the 17th parallel. The Geneva Accords were supposed to be temporary, but they did not bring peace for long. The separation into North and South Vietnam created two different areas with different ideas. This division set the stage or prepared the way for another conflict. This new conflict would become the long and difficult war we know as the Vietnam War, which involved the United States. Two countries, one war. After the war with France, Vietnam was split into two parts. There was North Vietnam and South Vietnam. They became like two separate countries, even though many Vietnamese people wanted one nation. This division was supposed to be temporary, but it became a strong border that divided families and friends. In the north, the leader was Ho Chi Minh. His government was communist. A communist government usually controls land, businesses, and people's lives tightly. North Vietnam had strong helpers from outside. China and the Soviet Union, two big communist nations, gave them support, weapons, and money. In the south, the leader was Ngo Dinh Diem. His government was anti-communist, meaning it was against communism. The United States of America strongly supported South Vietnam and President Diem. The USA sent lots of financial aid and military help. However, many people in South Vietnam did not like Diem. His government was authoritarian and often acted without listening to its people. Diem's rule was considered harsh and unfair by many Vietnamese, which made him very unpopular. Because of Diem's unpopular rule and the desire for a united communist Vietnam, a group of fighters started working against the government in the South. These were called the Viet Cong. They were Vietnamese people living in the South. They used guerrilla tactics, fighting in small groups from forests and villages. The Viet Cong received help from North Vietnam. The North sent them soldiers, weapons, and supplies to support their fight. To move these supplies south, North Vietnam used a system of paths and trails. This was mostly hidden in the thick jungles of neighboring countries, Laos and Cambodia. This network of routes was known as the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It was not easy to travel, but it was vital for supplying the Viet Cong's fight against the South Vietnamese government and its American allies. All of this happened during a time called the Cold War. This was a global rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. They competed for power and influence around the world. The USA feared that communism would spread from one country to another. This idea was called the domino theory. American leaders believed that if one country in Asia, like Vietnam, became communist, then other countries nearby would also fall to communism, like falling dominoes. This strong fear of spreading communism greatly influenced America's decision to help South Vietnam and get involved in the conflict. So the war in Vietnam was not just a civil war. It was also a part of the bigger fight between the USA and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. 3. America goes to war. In the years before the war grew large, the United States sent help to South Vietnam. This help included money and also military advisors. These were American soldiers who came to train the South Vietnamese army. By 1963, there were thousands of American advisors in the country. However, South Vietnam had problems. Its leader, Ngo Dinh Diem, was removed from power in 1963 and killed. This caused more trouble and made the situation less stable. Then, in August 1964, an important event happened. American Navy ships in the Gulf of Tonkin said they were attacked by North Vietnamese boats. President Lyndon Johnson told the American people about these attacks. Soon after, the U.S. Congress made a special decision called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. This resolution gave President Johnson wide power to use military force in Vietnam without a full declaration of war. With this new power, President Johnson quickly made the American role in the conflict much bigger. In early 1965, the United States began a long bombing campaign called Operation Rolling Thunder. American planes dropped bombs on North Vietnam. In March 1965, the first American combat troops arrived in South Vietnam. These were soldiers sent to fight, not just to advise. Their arrival was a big change. Over the next few years, the number of American soldiers in Vietnam grew greatly. It went from a few thousand to almost 500,000. The United States was now fully involved in the war. 4. The war gets bigger. After U.S. combat troops arrived in 1965, the American military force in Vietnam grew very quickly. The number of U.S. soldiers increased significantly. Soon, there were nearly 500,000 American troops in the country. The United States brought its strong military technology to the war. They used powerful weapons, including fast jets for bombing, big guns called artillery to shoot far distances, and many helicopters. Helicopters were a new and important part of this war. They allowed soldiers to move quickly into battle areas and to take wounded soldiers away. In November 1965, the U.S. Army fought a major battle in the Ia Drang Valley. This was one of the first large-scale fights between American ground troops and soldiers from the North Vietnamese Army. The battle showed how important helicopters were for fighting in difficult places like valleys and forests. Both sides learned new tactics and strategies from this fight. A very important event happened in January 1968. This was the Tet Offensive. It was a massive surprise attack by communist forces, including the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army. They attacked more than 100 cities, towns, and military bases across South Vietnam. One key target was the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. The fighting was shown on television back in the United States. From a military view, the Tet Offensive was not a success for the attackers. They did not hold the places they attacked, and they lost a large number of soldiers. However, the Tet Offensive had a huge psychological impact on the United States. Seeing the enemy attack so widely and strongly made many Americans doubt what their government was telling them about the war. People at home started to think the war might not be close to ending. This event helped turn public opinion more strongly against the war effort. Another very dark event occurred in March 1968. This was the My Lai massacre. In the village of My Lai, U.S. Army soldiers killed hundreds of unarmed Vietnamese civilians. Most of the victims were women, children, and old people. This horrible act showed a brutal side of the conflict. When news of the massacre became known later, it caused great anger and shock in America and around the world. It further fueled the growing movement against the war and raised difficult questions about the actions of some soldiers and the effects of the war on people. 5. People against the war. As the war in Vietnam continued, a powerful movement against it began to grow in the United States. Many Americans started to believe the war was wrong, or that the U.S. should not be involved in the conflict. This anti-war movement became very strong. Media coverage played a key role. For the first time, television brought images of war directly into American homes almost every evening. People saw the fighting, the destruction, and the human cost. This direct view of the war made many citizens question why the U.S. was fighting. Because of these feelings, people started to protest in large numbers across the country. Big demonstrations and marches happened in major cities. Hundreds of thousands of people came together to ask for peace and an end to the fighting in Vietnam. Young people, especially students, were often leaders in these protests. Many college campuses became centers for anti-war activity, with students holding rallies and other forms of protest. The military draft was another major reason for the growing opposition. The government could force young men to join the army and be sent to Vietnam. This mandatory service was very unpopular, particularly among young men who felt the war was unjust. Families worried about their sons' safety. Shocking events that happened during the war also fueled the movement. When news of the My Lai massacre became public, where U.S. soldiers killed hundreds of unarmed civilians. It caused great outrage and made people question the actions of their military in Vietnam. Another tragic event that increased anti-war feelings happened in May of 1970. At Kent State University in Ohio, National Guardsmen fired into a crowd of students protesting the war, killing 4 students. This event shocked the nation and led to widespread protests across the United States. The combination of heavy media coverage, the unpopular draft, and terrible events like My Lai and Kent State caused public opinion in America to turn strongly against the war. Opinion polls showed that a majority of Americans wanted the U.S. to withdraw from Vietnam. The large and vocal anti-war movement put significant pressure on politicians and the government to find a way to end the war. It showed that many people wanted peace. 6. A new way to end the war. In 1969, Richard Nixon became the new president of the United States. The war in Vietnam was not popular. President Nixon wanted to end it, but he wanted to end it in a way he called peace with honor. This meant leaving Vietnam, but not simply giving up. He had a new plan for the war. This plan was called Vietnamization. It was a big change. Before, more and more American soldiers went to Vietnam. Now, the plan was to bring American soldiers home. They would go home slowly, step by step. At the same time, the United States would help the Army of South Vietnam. American soldiers and helpers would train the South Vietnamese Army. They would also give them many weapons and supplies. The idea was that the South Vietnamese Army would become strong enough. They would fight the war against the North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong by themselves. The United States wanted South Vietnam to be able to defend itself, but ending the war was not easy. Even as American soldiers started to leave, the fighting continued. President Nixon also decided to do some secret things. He ordered American planes to bomb places in countries near Vietnam, like Cambodia and Laos. The enemy soldiers from North Vietnam used secret paths through these countries to get supplies to the south. The United States wanted to stop these supply lines. The secret bombings were meant to hurt the enemy and make them want to talk about peace. At the same time, talks were happening to try and end the war. People from the United States, South Vietnam, North Vietnam, and the Viet Cong met in Paris, France. These talks took a very, very long time. There were many disagreements. It was hard to find a way for everyone to agree to stop fighting. Finally, after years of talks, they reached an agreement. This happened in January 1973. The agreement was called the Paris Peace Accords. It said that there should be a ceasefire, which means the fighting must stop. It also said that all American soldiers must leave Vietnam within 60 days. And it said that the two sides would exchange the soldiers they had taken as prisoners during the war. After the Paris Peace Accords were signed, the last American soldiers officially left Vietnam in March 1973. The United States hoped that the war would end now. They had a new plan with Vietnamization, secret actions, and peace talks, but the future of Vietnam was still not clear. 7. The end of the war. The peace agreement signed in Paris in 1973 was supposed to end the war. It allowed American soldiers to leave Vietnam, but the peace did not last long. Soon after the last American troops went home in March 1973, fighting began again between the North and South. The ceasefire did not hold. In early 1975, North Vietnam started a very big military offensive. It was their final plan to win the war and unite Vietnam under their rule. They sent a large number of soldiers and tanks into South Vietnam. The South Vietnamese Army, the ARVN, had to fight this large attack mostly alone. They did not have the strong air power or supplies from the United States anymore. American help had largely stopped. Without this significant U.S. support, the ARVN found it very difficult to stop the North Vietnamese forces. The North's army moved quickly down the country, attacking with great force. Cities in South Vietnam fell one by one, sometimes very fast. The South's defenses were not strong enough to hold back the offensive. The army of South Vietnam was collapsing in many places. The North Vietnamese forces kept coming closer to Saigon, the capital city of South Vietnam. As they got closer, fear and panic grew in the city. People worried deeply about what would happen when the North arrived. On April 30, 1975, the soldiers from North Vietnam reached Saigon. Their tanks rolled into the city streets. This day marked the official end of the long war. It is called the Fall of Saigon. The North Vietnamese flag was raised over the presidential palace. As the end came, there was a dramatic rush for people to leave the city. Many Americans were still in Saigon, including people working at the U.S. Embassy. Also, thousands of South Vietnamese people who had worked with or supported the United States were in danger. Helicopters were used in a large operation to fly people from buildings and roofs in Saigon to big American ships waiting in the sea. It was a large and urgent evacuation as people hoped to escape. After the capital fell, the war that had divided Vietnam for years finally stopped. Vietnam became one single country again. The government from North Vietnam took control of the entire country. Vietnam was officially reunified under communist rule. The fighting had ended, but the changes for the people and the country were very big. A new time began for a united Vietnam. After the fighting. The war was over, but the time after the fighting was very hard for both Vietnam and the United States. The cost in human lives was immense. Millions of Vietnamese soldiers and civilians died. Many more were injured or had to leave their homes. In the United States, over 58,000 American soldiers died and hundreds of thousands were wounded. The fighting caused terrible damage across Vietnam. Cities, villages, farms, and forests were destroyed by bombs and chemicals. It was a huge task for Vietnam to rebuild its country and make its economy strong again. For many years, the country struggled and was separated from much of the world. In the United States, the war's end led to much reflection. Many Americans felt tired of war and did not want to send troops to fight in distant lands. This public feeling was sometimes called the Vietnam Syndrome, and it influenced American foreign policy for years. American soldiers who came home often faced great difficulties. Many had serious physical wounds. Many also suffered from deep emotional and mental pain, known as PTSD, from what they experienced. The use of chemicals like Agent Orange during the war caused long-term health problems for some veterans. Helping these veterans became an important issue. The end of the war in Vietnam also had big effects on nearby countries in Southeast Asia. In Cambodia, a very brutal group called the Khmer Rouge took power and killed millions of their own people. Laos also became a communist state. The whole region changed politically after the conflict. Over the years, Vietnam started to recover and move forward. In the 1980s, the government began economic reforms called D-1ED5 IM1EDBI. These changes helped to make the economy more market-focused and allowed for more trade. Vietnam became more connected to the global economy. The relationship between Vietnam and the United States slowly began to change too. The former enemies started to talk and build connections. In 1995, the United States and Vietnam officially started normal diplomatic relations. An American president, Bill Clinton, visited Vietnam in the year 2000. Today, people in Vietnam and the United States still remember the war and its impacts. What are the lessons from this long and painful conflict? It showed the terrible human cost of war. It also showed the limits of military power and the importance of understanding the local situation. The war changed how Americans saw their government and military actions abroad. For Vietnam, it marked the end of foreign rule and the start of a new era, even with many challenges. Memorials in both countries honor the millions who suffered and died. The legacy of the Vietnam War is complex, but it remains a key part of history for both nations.
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.